Hello everyone, welcome back to episode 24 of Talk to the Chip. We are continuing with
our two-part podcast on the Oramics collection by Daphne Oram. So when Daphne Oram was composing the pieces in this collection, she was doing all this other work to survive as a composer. And one of the things she was doing was giving lots of lectures about electronic music and the history of electronic music with references and playing her own pieces and Stockhaus and Pierre Schaeffer and stuff. But at every single one of these lectures, she always read out this bit of text written by Francis Bacon, because she claimed that although electronic music became an audible reality in the 20th century, it was actually invented and created 350 years earlier in the early 17th century by British explorer and man of letters Francis Bacon. And Francis Bacon had written this book called The New Atlantis. And basically the story of the New Atlantis is about sailors who set off from Britain and find a utopian futuristic society on an island somewhere out there in the ocean.
the Lost Atlantis.
Exactly. And they describe all the wonderful technological and socially advanced things that go on in this society. And there's a big section in it about sound and music, because Francis Bacon studied at Cambridge University in the late 16th century, early 17th century. In those days, education at that level still followed the old medieval system that music was considered one of the arts of measurement, or one of the sciences of measurement. So basically it was like a branch of mathematics. It was taught more as a branch of mathematics. And so when, in his story, when they encounter this advanced society, there has a lot of stuff about sound in there. So this, I'll just read this text. We also have sound houses where we practice and demonstrate all sounds and their generation. We have harmonies, which you have not, of quarter sounds and lesser slides of sounds. Diverse instruments of music, likewise to you unknown, some sweeter than any you have, together with bells and rings that are dainty and sweet. We represent small sounds as great and deep, likewise great sounds extenuate and sharp. We make diverse tremblings and warblings of sounds, which in their original are entire. We represent and imitate all articulate sounds and letters, and the voices and notes of beasts and birds. We have certain helps which set to the ear do further the hearing greatly. We also have diverse strange and artificial echoes, reflecting the voice many times, and as it were tossing it, and some that give back the voice louder than it came, some shriller and some deeper, yea, some rendering the voice differing in the letters or articulate sound from that they receive. We have also means to convey sounds in trunks and pipes in strange lines and distances. Now, she had like millions of copies of this book. And she would always read that little bit of text out when she did her lectures. And basically, for each of the things that they say they have, she would find examples with, at the time, contemporary electronic music, including her own stuff as well. And yet, in the time when Francis Bacon wrote this, of course, science, there was the church was so powerful, but science was kind of like a branch of magic. So this again, there's this link with the mystical there all the time in all their stuff.
Oh, thank you. Actually, I think it is important to note this article, the woman from New Atlantis also.
Good.
From by Dan Wilson. Delves more into this as part of her book, like an individual note of music, sound, and electronics.
Yes.
So then we can also say there's been aspects of her when we remember the earlier composers that we investigated in the earlier episodes, like Pauline Oliveros.
Yes.
We can see a deep listening approach like hers. Or also we talked about like some of the spiritual aspects. More than one of them had that, like Eliane Redick has or Ferreira also had that kind of a spiritual aspect. But this one, I cannot speak much about it because I haven't read the whole thing. But I can, when I listen to it, the music, I can hear that sort of sound object approach, which has that sort of like storytelling.
It's funny, isn't it? Because at the same time, it's always tempered with this very English thing of not taking oneself too seriously.
Okay, so you've been referring to being very English in this episode.
Yeah. Well, you should. But the thing is, if you hear, for example, there's two things on this collection. There's 4 little excerpts. She went up to Manchester and worked at a school there. I think the Ardwick School.
What is the school called? I should visit. I'm gonna see. I'm gonna be in Manchester.
Oh yes, you go to the Ardwick School
to see Oteker. Should I go there and ask about? Or I can just go to Goldsmith Uni here to ask more about.
Exactly.
It.
Yeah. But there's 4 recordings in this collection of little school kids doing stuff that she'd obviously she'd gone up and done like a workshop with them, and they're recording with tape loops and stuff, and they're in Manchester, and it's really sweet little Mancunian kids saying that they're going to be playing the tape loop and the bell and the gongo, and you hear their little voices, and it's really, really nice.
Yeah.
I'm very nostalgic as well.
Metal sheet again, tin lid, chime, wire and frame. Keyboards, wood block, echo sounder, scraper and whistle.
But then, towards the end of the collection, right at the end of CD2, there's the conclusion and the Studio Jinx thing, where you hear Daphne and her friends and her technicians speaking, and the way they speak is completely different. There's this very clipped, very, very English way of speaking. And you immediately...
like a BBC archive video from 1950. I really like that.
Exactly. But you immediately get a complete cultural picture of where she was from, the world that she was part of, which was very, very, frankly, very repressed.
The photographs probably give you some idea of this intriguing equipment, but if you would like to visit the studio yourself and see it and hear it, do give me a ring.
So she's got all this sort of like mystical thinking, but it's not directly expressed. It can't take itself seriously.
This album is so wild, like wild. Like maybe that's because of that kind of repressing. When you like. I can, for example, this Rockets in Ursa Major piece, the excerpts. It literally is like a space kind of storytelling again.
It's like real sci-fi, really modern.
The first excerpt of it is very much like the Doctor Who theme song, which was composed in the studio she set up. Yeah. Also, bear in mind, this happened before FM synthesis was invented.
Before any synthesis was invented, really.
Like additive or subtractive, whatever. But like my point is more like the reason I'm saying FM is because there are moments like there is a piece with the kid. It's almost like wanting to be with the vocoder. The studio experiment number 4.
Yes.
You see that one. It's almost like with an effect that has like ring modulation and a vocoder, but it's not it. That's not it.
It sounds almost like it's early speech synthesis in a way, doesn't it? But it's so mashed up. It's so heavily processed, that voice.
There is a pioneer in that, Charles Dodge, the speech songs. And that's if you listen to those works, they are from 1976. And what are we talking about now?
1961, 62.
Okay,
Yeah.
but then again, when you listen to this synthesized voices, when you said speech synthesis, I wanted to refer to this. It's very much like Charles Dodge's music. It's like the early, Daft Punk, before Daft Punk. Charles Dodge existed, that sort of.
But interestingly though, the vocoder dates back to the Second World War.
Oh yeah.
I think we talked about this before. It was the vocoder was a way of encoding, as the name suggests, encoding information so that the enemy couldn't work out what was going to be said. So that the people receiving the information at one end, the recording at one end, it would be unintelligible unless they had the exact frequencies of the filters to decode it.
So in this one, I mean, it's that's one of the highlights of the album. In this piece, you have that kind of speech synthesis.
Yeah.
But also there are moments like where edges of the high frequency range are being explored or
pushed right up to the point where they're going to explode.
That's why it's wild. That's why I'm using the word wild. Like when you said repressed.
Yeah.
I think that's like a playground kind of, but a very skillful, sophisticated one, because here's someone who invented an instrument and she tried to adapt that to further technological developments, after the tiny connectors were being introduced, because, this is walls, not transistors. So then also like there are these tracks like, another wild thing. High Speed Flight. There's a track called High Speed Flight in disc one. It's reminding me like reversed intro track of a metal album.
Yes.
There are this sort of harmonics, but also in each of these, again, like episode metallic, the contrasts and then giving space.
Well, it's funny you mention metal, a kind of aspect of popular music, because one of the weirdest tracks is this. Basically, it's all about very speed. Snow. So the last track on the first CD is called Snow, and it was a film commission. So it's part of the soundtrack for a film by Johnny Hawksworth. So the film was called Snow from 1963. And what it starts off with is very slow percussion. And obviously very, very speeded down. It sounds almost a little bit like the percussion in Poème Électronique or Désert. It's like rattling, rolling drums.
Isn't that a very good precursor to the other track that we've been talking about? The Tumblewash one.
Yes, also it's related to that, yeah.
It's not precursor, so it happens, I think it's after that track. Yeah. But also, it's not just that one, because when you go to the second part, it connects well.
There's lines between all of these things. Yeah. But what's interesting about the track Snow is that it slowly very speeds up, so it starts very slowed down, and the tape speed slowly increases, like semitone by semitone, until there's like a real rhythm going on with it, and it is a drum kit, and then a guitar joins it, and then a bass joins it, and then it's a real proper piece of pop music. And then it speeds up and speeds up and speeds up, and it sounds like a tiny little quick little fast little pop tune based on the blues from the 1960s. Wow. Very odd thing, and because in the way that the very speed works, it works very musically, but it also works kind of stylistically. So it starts off with something that sounds like a piece of electronic music and ends up with a daft little pop song.
It's almost like a whole lesson in how to compose, like the structural elements, and the textural elements, but then it's like becoming a full band, but also it resolves into something that almost is going to be like an explosion in this space, because then it is this is followed by the excerpt 2 of the again also major piece, which is like the Doctor Who bits.
Yeah.
These are, of course, like this is a collection created
After her death.
It wasn't her way of, but it's there are very nice references between each tracks, and it's this her touch and her very skillful, unique approach. You can hear it in each and every piece, even if they employ different sorts of techniques. So
yeah. Well, I mean, that's also a thing with her is that. And I think, you know, we're trying to define in a way this atmosphere that she creates that makes it so recognisable. But one of the things that she does a lot, which other composers of the same period weren't doing, is she uses really diatonic, almost like folk melody stuff.
Yeah.
But with sounds and intonation, and then in a setting where it still sounds like electronic music, sounds like contemporary music, sounds like it could be serial or something.
Oh yeah, exactly. The serialist kind of like the semitone changes and
So often they are very kind of sweet, simple major minor melodies, but in such a weird context. Or I mean, there's one where she used such very, very strange Pompey Ballet.
Oh yeah.
Which is track 8 on the first CD. It has this thing. It's a totally normal tune, but it's synth playing it with very weird resonances, maybe spring or even a string, a wire reverb, and a very weird intonation, which gives it this very odd, mystical quality to it.
Again, mystical. There you go. I mean, I think then this is the perfect spot to quote her. You're telling me like this sort of very non-traditional, but also there is this unique language and storytelling. So in her book, released in 1972, she says, an individual note, music, sound and electronics, says, in my work, I am not concerned with synthesizing orchestral sounds. We have excellent orchestras for making those sounds. My interest is in making new sounds which are musical.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of explains what you're talking about, right? But also there's this aspect, like when we look at these early electronic music composers, some of the pieces are named as etudes or study, etc., studie. I mean, in the case of Bülent Arel, there was a study. In the case of Pierre Schaeffer, it's etude, etc. And we can see like she named some of them as like a studio experiment 1, studio experiment 2. But like her studio experiments are sounding more musical than these. It's not just a mere etude or study. Do you know what I mean? Like you can see that here's someone who is trying to create musical sounds from these things with these things.
I mean, lots of what we're talking about here comes together in one of the pieces here called Pulse Persephone.
This is a very this piece has like a lot of quietness in the dynamic range.
Now, what's interesting is that this was lots of interesting thing about it, but this was actually, it was a commission. 1965, it was commissioned for the Treasures of the Commonwealth exhibition at the Royal Academy of Arts. So Persephone, it's related to ancient Greece, and Persephone was a young goddess that was held captive by Hades in hell.
Oh, wow.
And so she became the goddess of the dead. But she's also kind of like a symbol of spring, because that's why winter exists, is because that's when Persephone is down in the underworld with her uncle. And so there's all this kind of literary allusions and maybe even magical allusions going on there, mystical stuff. But the piece itself has this constant pulse, a constant beat to it on a drum. Which, of course, none of the mainland European composers would touch.
No.
For Stockhausen, if something happened 3 times, you were kicked out of the class.
If you can start to dance to it, you will be. No, exactly. Yeah. No, you don't hear that. And also one of the experiments exactly that I think this one. Which piece is this? Piece 31. Studio Experiment number 5. Yeah. That's just before the Broxielande one, which we can't pronounce.
Yes, so it's a polyphonic one. Yes.
It's this. It has this different pitches, but there is that call and response like rhythm. There are very nice rhythmic elements, but also when she does that, you can hear the different properties of sound being explored, right? So that's a very good example for that.
That's it. So using tape loops to create regular rhythms and actually playing regular rhythms, very, very out of step with all the research going on in mainland Europe and to a degree in the States. I mean, the regular rhythm stuff of the minimalists came much later.
Oh yeah, exactly. Like it's you're talking about like these San Francisco tape music centers, like Steve Reich, It's Gonna Rain, or like Come Out, etc. But then when we think about like Philip Glass and all that, exactly, it's that sort of more minimalist Moondog even. Like another piece that's just like that in this
Lamonta Young
album is Costain Suite number 35. That is like reminding me like chopping the sounds, these sort of audio editing techniques, but then they make up a different rhythmic dialogue. And that's again in her very own language.
Well, the Costain Suite is one of the most developed pieces on the whole thing. It's like 30 minutes long. It's one of the few that's in stereo.
Okay.
It's funny you mentioned like spatialization and depth, but basically there's only about 3 tracks in this whole
stereo
collection that are actually in stereo. They're mostly in mono. So there's stuff moving around in stereo, and mostly electronic sounds, a couple of instrumental sounds. But considering the gear that she had, or even more considering the gear that she didn't have, the degree of processing in this sound is incredible in this one.
That's when I say space. Actually, my point is more about like how do you exactly the depth, but also how do you place the sounds, like giving space to each other, where there are like quieter moments, or where they have like different effects of different dialogues and things, that sort of songwriting elements, which you would hear in a pop music production also. There is accessibility, but there is also storytelling, and also the children's voices, or the funny track, the Mary Had a Little Lamb, which
well, that's an interesting one, because what that is a classic thing is that if you put headphones on someone and you delay the sound of their own voice getting to them, that's what happens. You can't speak because you are waiting to hear your own voice, and it doesn't happen when you say it.
There you go.
And and it's well, it happens by accident quite a lot in the studio. Even these wonderful digital days, even with crappy latency from digital audio workstations, you put headphones on someone and their voice is coming to them later than they're saying it. It's very hard to speak, and you start giggling and falling apart.
Oh, that makes sense. And the whole album also has that. So here's an example, popular music example. I'm a massive fan of Boards of Canada. And Boards of Canada uses all sorts of samples, including samples from like sounds from Sesame Street or children's things, and then they came up with their own very unique sound, which is ethereal, but also with their own devices. I think so many people try to recreate, but then you can't sound like that. And here is someone who was doing that sort of thing way before. Like in some cases, it also feels like the ballroom work of the Caretakers. The musician who got diagnosed with dementia at an early age, then he uses 1920s ballroom music, and then that's deteriorated slowly, gradually, which represents how his mind deteriorates. But there are like moments in this album where you have that sort of the Caretaker or Boards of Canada like eerie, ethereal deterioration, but also humor, maybe that connects with the mystical.
But also she's not afraid of again, like the Caretaker, she's not afraid of letting things distort or deteriorate. There's none of the squeaky clean technical perfection that you find even with Luciano Berio. She allows stuff to get really distorted.
Very high ends of frequency. Pushes that very hard. I mean, do you think it's also a part of the instrument?
I think it's part of the instrument. I think it's part of the technology of the time. I think it's also that with the analog technology that they had then, when you distorted stuff, you were just adding harmonic, second, third, fourth harmonic. Whereas when we go into distortion these days with digital stuff, it completely destroys the shape of the waveform and it just sounds hideous.
There you go. I mean, also she came up with her own terminology for this instrument. So this is talking about the network of resistors and a sawtooth oscillator, this pitch master. Maybe that's where things go extreme. She referred to these pitch codes as neumes. The circuits. Yeah, it's part of this design. I mean, the technical aspect of this instrument is obviously that would deserve another episode. We're already dedicating part 1 and part 2, but.
Well, it's interesting. I didn't know. Yeah, I didn't know this.
Her approach to frequency and pitch is quite different. I mean, in her own way, she came up with her own terminology for this.
Well, not just her own terminology, but according to this, which is admittedly is the daphneoram.org website, but it says these circuits were based on digital flip-flops, memory cells, and as such, it was a very early digitally controlled oscillator for which Oram was granted both US and UK patents.
That's mad. I mean, if she had maybe lived longer, like, I don't know, like, what would it be like? That's a forerunner of computer music also, algorithmic.
Well, but she died very early.
2003, yeah, very
2003,
young.
so
very young.
She was like 77 or something when she died. But she did live to see the 90s and digital technology and a lot of this stuff flowering, Something that occurred to me listening through to the whole thing is something that we talked about when we talked about Laurie Spiegel. Another composer who does a very wide range of different styles and different techniques, but is at their best when they are exploring darkness.
Darkness, exactly. Laurie Spiegel's voices within the piece we looked at, definitely.
And there's the same feeling here, is that Daphne Oram, there was all the kind of social pressures, and then there was the commercial pressures to make commercial music
Foley's,
and popular music and Foley's and all the rest of it. For
non-avant-garde things, not avant-garde. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
But where her skill really shines is when she's with exploring the darker side of
exactly.
human imagination and our human history and
you can hear the first time I listened to her music ages ago, I wasn't expecting to hear so many dark elements in it. I was quite surprised but also mesmerized.
Well, I think she's one of these characters that was kind of rediscovered, maybe because she was a woman. Everyone, of course, knows the Doctor Who theme, and people talked about Delia Derbyshire and White Noise, but it wasn't really until the early 21st century that Daphne Oram's name became so well known.
She set up the whole studio.
But she's kind of the brains behind it all. And I was not only lucky enough to see the Oramics machine at the Science Museum, but I also was at the Albert Hall in 2018 to hear a performance of Still Point, her piece that was kind of lost, her big orchestral piece. Orchestral piece for orchestra, microphones, tape manipulation, and turntables.
Mixed media, basically.
Yes, mixed media, but from the 1940s.
Yeah, that's just mind blowing.
Massively ahead of her time.
As a lucky citizen of the United Kingdom, you were able to see it at the time I was not living in here in 2018.
Yes, it was a very important night, and a very important night for presenting.
Somebody needs to present it again.
Yeah, I think it needs to be put on again. But it was Shiva Fesharecki presenting this Daphne Oram piece with the London Contemporary Orchestra.
Oh, wow.
So it was an impressive thing.
Oh.
So, yes, but hopefully we'll all get to see it again sometime. So thanks for listening, everyone, to this, our first ever two-parter.
It is, and exactly the perfect person to do it. Daphne Oram, the great Daphne Oram.
And please dig into this piece. It's all available on
Bandcamp,
Bandcamp and YouTube.
And, and hopefully the Science Museum can make the Oramics machine accessible for us to be able to visit and see it again.
Fantastic. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks for listening.